welcome to the next match in the public sector debate competition. I'm Tamika Godmighty, Communications Specialist here at the Transformation Implementation Unit and the host for this match today. This is the fourth staging of the public sector debate competition, and we are happy that you've joined us, whether here at 6 Saxthorpe Avenue or online on our social media platforms. This year's competition got off to a great start this morning. If you are just joining us, remember you can catch up on the excitement on either our Facebook page or our YouTube channel. Continuing the action, we have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, who should have been debating the Agro-Invest Corporation of Jamaica, who are unavoidably absent. But the show must go on. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade will be presenting arguments for the Moot. Be it resolved that public sector wages should be capped as a fixed percentage of GDP. I will have the team from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade introduce themselves. Thank you so much, Team Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. And today, our adjudicators are our partners from the Jamaica Association for Debating and Empowerment. We'll have the judges introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. The name is Javon Downey, and I'll be serving as the chair adjudicator for this match.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Roshana Jarrett, and I'll be a wing adjudicator.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chantal Hughes, and I am also a wing adjudicator for this match.
Thank you so much, judges. The team is familiar with the rules, so all the best to you, and we listen to your arguments.
All right, so just before the first speaker comes, just some point of clarification because you're debating alone. For the cross-questioning, so while you're giving your speeches, you are going to be asked 3 POIs. That is mandatory, so you have to accept them, and that applies for both first and second speaker. And when it comes to the period of cross-examination, we'll be asking you 6 questions. You'll answer while they're asked, but the reply speaker, though, has to give a more fulsome responses to all the POIs and the questions posed throughout the cross-examination. Is that clear?
So once we raise the POI, we're required to answer. Yes. Yeah. During the cross-examination, we will go on
questions. Yes.
And then the role of the reply speaker is to listen to all the questions that are being posed by the judges, and that becomes your
reply speech.
While solidifying the arguments.
You have to accept them.
Yes, your time is still the same.
Not new rules per se, so we've adopted we've kind of changed the model of the way to
All right, so now let's welcome the first speaker. Here.
Here.
Whenever you're ready.
Oh, I should start. And
yes.
Oh, sorry. Okay. All right. Mr. Speaker, judges, guests, good morning. Today, we, the proposition, confidently defend the Moot, be it resolved that public sector wages should be capped as a fixed percentage of GDP. First, let me begin by clarifying some key terms. Public sector wages refers to the salaries and compensation paid by the government to its employees, such as teachers, nurses, police officers, and so on. A cap typically refers to a limit or maximum boundary that protects against potentially adverse movements or costs. And finally, GDP, or gross domestic product, represents the total monetary value of finished goods and services produced within a country. Consequently, GDP measures the income earned from that production. So when we say as a fixed percentage of GDP, we mean as a set share of national income. Mr. Speaker, we emphasize that this is not an absolute cap, not a fixed figure, but a cap relative to productivity. The proposition believes that such a policy demonstrates a high degree of fiscal responsibility and supports the implementation of our development goals. So let's say, just as an example, that the cap is 10%. If the GDP is $100, that means $10 allocated to wages. But if the GDP is $1,000, then that 10% becomes $100. Mr. Speaker, the current trend in public sector wage growth is concerning. According to Mr. Keith Duncan, chairman of the Economic Program Oversight Committee, EPOC, in the 2021-2022 fiscal year, public sector wages and salaries totaled $222 billion, which represented 9.58% of the GDP. But at the end of the 2024-2025 fiscal year, the figure stood at a whopping $414 billion, approximately 13% of GDP. This means it consumed roughly 45% of Jamaica's tax revenue. These figures may seem great at first to civil servants, but in reality, they pose a serious threat. Jamaica's Fiscal Commissioner, Mr. Courtney Williams, stated that the public sector wage bill is projected to rise to $463 billion in the 2025-2026 fiscal year. That's around 13.3% of the GDP, or about 50% of tax revenues. This recently operationalized fiscal commission, which I've just referenced, according to former Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clark, is the guardian and interpreter of Jamaica's fiscal rules. So we would be remiss not to heed its warning. So, Mr. Speaker, the proposition will present four main arguments. First, I, as first speaker, will show how capping public sector wages as a fixed percentage of GDP is an effective way of managing debt. Second, I will explain how this policy helps to manage inflation. Third, our second speaker will defend the price stability argument. And four, show how this encourages effective resource allocation. My third speaker will summarize and concretize these points. Now, a wage cap would not be determined in a vacuum, but instead be developed in consultation with trade unions, civil society, and technical experts to determine a sustainable percentage which is fair for civil servants. Mr. Speaker, a relative wage cap supports macroeconomic stability and prevents dangerous debt accumulation. Unsustainable wage growth leads to more borrowing. And if we borrow from Peter for pay Paul, how we are going to pay back Peter? A cap ensures that public wages do not spiral.
Point of information?
Yes.
You just said that the public sector wages are funded from government revenues or taxes. So how then are you saying that we are borrowing to fund said public sector wages?
Mm-hmm. If the public sector wages rise uncontrollably and we don't have the budget for it because it is also paid from what we earn as a GDP, then it means that we would be borrowing, even if not directly to pay wages, then we would have to borrow to deal with other economic activities that the government is responsible for. Right. So not too long ago, Jamaica was in debt distress. A 2014 article from the World Bank says that Jamaica has been burdened by a high level of debt for decades. Since 2013, the government has successfully implemented fiscal consolidation measures, including capping the wage bill as a share of GDP, reducing the public debt to GDP ratio by more than 60 percentage points to 74% of GDP in the 2023 to 2024 financial year. That's the lowest it's been in 25 years. In addition, let's look at Ireland. After the 2008 financial crisis, Ireland introduced public sector pay cuts and implemented strict caps on wage bills relative to GDP as part of an EU IMF bailout program. This helped stabilize government finances as a result and rebuild economic confidence. Ireland exited the bailout successfully in 2013 and became one of the fastest growing economies in the EU. Mr. Speaker, the relationship between the public debt and inflation also cannot be ignored. The IMF states that increasing public wages can be inflationary if it raises public debt without credible plans to repay it. Simply, if investors lose confidence in the government's ability to settle debts, prices rise. However, when inflation is managed, the country is seen as more attractive to investors who establish businesses that provide jobs, increase tax revenue, and productivity. Putting a relative cap on public sector wages does not automatically mean the public sector wages will be reduced. So this is not what we are asking for. We are calling for an acknowledgement of that point at which increases in public sector compensation come at the detriment of our national growth, and to exercise the discipline of staying below the target. Setting a cap facilitates us doing so. To recap, a cap on public wages tied to GDP enforces fiscal discipline and helps to manage debt. It also manages inflation, which improves investor confidence, advancing our national growth. Our argument is simple, Mr. Speaker. Don't hang your hat where and can't reach it. And remember, when the GDP grows, so does room for wages. Thank you.
All right, so now we will enter into the first period of cross-questioning.
All right, thank you very much, first speaker. So, two things. I noted that you shied away from actually giving us a percentage in terms of what the cap will look like. But one of the biggest problems, and our Prime Minister has addressed it multiple times on multiple platforms, is the issue of productivity. And where it is that employees are disgruntled, maybe because we're capping the public sector wages, how then do we ensure that we are maximizing in terms of productivity when we say to the people that we might not have an increase, or the increase is based on whatever is happening in the economy? How do we account for productivity?
Thank you for that question. The studies from the IMF have actually not shown that these wage increases increase productivity or efficiency per se, and also when we put a cap on wages, it kind of forces the government to make better decisions, and so that we would have to look at, within this framework, additional methods of assessing productivity, especially because of the limited resources.
All right, thank you for that. A follow-up question. In addition to productivity, we grapple with the issue of brain drain. And when we lose our best and our brightest from the public sector, and we're now implementing a cap, then how do we mitigate against we spending money to educate our nation's children, individuals, and then they take that education and invest it into another man's country? Do you think this cap will be more detrimental than beneficial?
Thank you for that question. The reality of surrounding brain drain is actually far more nuanced. Most Jamaicans migrate to the US, Canada, or the UK, and they often find themselves disappointed when they get there because they realize that even though the pay may be higher, the cost of living is also higher. These countries are also able to pay more because their GDPs are exponentially larger. For example, according to the World Bank, their latest figures, of course, the US's GDP is nearly 28 trillion. The UK's GDP is 3.4 trillion USD, while Jamaica's GDP is just 19 billion USD. So when you look at the percentage spent on the wage bill as a percentage of GDP, in these countries, it's also much lower than Jamaica's, with the US's at around 9%, Canada's at around 10%, and the UK's at 10.5%, while Jamaica's is around 13%.
All right, thank you very much.
When there are periods where GDP is not increasing, or let's say there's a period of decrease, how does the government ensure that public sector workers are being paid adequately in alignment with the cap?
We want to emphasize that a wage cap is a maximum limit, so there is room below that cap, so it doesn't mean that automatically we are already allocating wages at that maximum. Also, there are legal restraints. We cannot arbitrarily reduce wages according to what's going on in the economy. But we also want to note that this would be a part of a broader financial plan, and there would be allocations for example, shocks to the economy, for example, natural disasters, so that we could always ensure that public sector wages are stable.
All right, so you spent a great deal speaking about the importance of managing our debt, right? But we have been managing debt without this cap. So why should we implement one now?
Sir, that is not the case. Actually, according to the World Bank, the financial consolidation measures implemented by Jamaica in 2013 are credited for the 60 percentage point reduction in Jamaica's debt to GDP ratio, which now currently stands at around 74%. So it's because of these measures that we've been able to reduce the debt to GDP ratio, and that's why we're afraid that without such a policy, it will go back to where it was before we implemented a cap on the wage bill.
All right, thank you. We will now take the submission from the second speaker. First speaker was good. There are 78. Let's go from now. First speaker was good. 78.
Mr. Speaker, we remain resolute that the public sector wages should be capped as a fixed percentage of GDP. Our opponents believe that a cap isn't necessary or beneficial to the country, but this is a short-sighted stance. We strongly believe that this is not only a matter of accounting, but it's a matter of economic stability, fairness, and good governance. When Jamaica's GDP is compared to our neighbors in the region, it stands much lower. Across Latin America and the Caribbean, public sector wages take up about 8.8% of the national GDP on average. Jamaica is at around 13%. This means we are paying much more for wages in the proportion to what we actually earn. My first speaker would have already mentioned our wage cap avoids debt and improves investor confidence through inflation management. As second speaker, I will be focusing on two major points. One, price stability, and two, effective resource allocation. Mr. Speaker, a maximum target for the wage bill keeps prices stable. Public sector wages are a major ongoing expense to the government. You were told these massive figures. How far are we willing to watch the wage bill grow disproportionately? It is 876 billion, At that point, it may as well be a Jamaican phone number. The effect on ordinary Jamaican like you and me is also negative. According to a statement released by the Bank of Jamaica in 2023, large future wage adjustments in the context of the tight domestic labor market are one factor that could result in greater than projected inflation in the future. Furthermore, according to the cost push effect, when public sector wages rise, the government's cost for providing services increase. So, in addition to greater costs for public services, unmanaged inflation means food gone up, housing gone up, and everything becomes expensive. Then who will suffer? We, the everyday citizens, we, the same public sector workers, especially the most economically vulnerable. Keeping prices stable is better for everyone. It's more balanced economic environment where you can go to the supermarket and know exactly what your dollar can cover. However, if a cap is placed on public sector wages to a fixed percentage of GDP, wages grow only when the economy grows. No more unsustainable increases. People can budget their earnings, and no more overspending, but just balance. Listen to me. This proposal encourages efficient resource allocation that is spending wisely. When we cap wages to a fixed percentage of GDP, we can more effectively distribute government resources and to areas that need it. This means we can really consider and attend to our priorities, rather than scrambling to deal with the most urgent matter.
Point of information? Yes. So I know you said that when we cap public sector work wages, then persons will have to know budget and determine how much they're going to spend. But when inflation is consistently on the rise and the economy is growing, how then do we say to persons, how then do you, well, let me just simplify the question. How do we account for inflation in your world?
All right, so, all right, can you repeat the question?
I'm saying with the economy not necessarily growing as we intend it to because of whatever external factors, but then we see the cost of living and inflation actually on the rise, how do you, in your world, how do you account for inflation when we're capping public sector wages?
All right, so as I said, remember that wages grow only when the economy grows. So once wages are growing or on a balance, then the economy itself. No.
Continue.
Right. Okay, so listen to me. This proposal encourages efficient resource allocation that is spending wisely. When we cap wages to a fixed percentage of GDP, we can more effectively distribute government resources to the areas that need it. This means we can really consider and attend to our priorities, rather than scrambling to deal with the most urgent matter, leaving little to nothing for other sectors. Now, let's be realistic. Our government doesn't have infinite money laying around. Every single extra dollar spent on public sector wages is a dollar not spent on healthcare and education, which also negatively affects the public sector and the general population at large. Think about it. These areas all serve the Jamaican populace. Let's say we have no form of restraint. At the trajectory we're on, your nearest hospital may not get the necessary equipment to run the tests your grandmother needs because wages are eating away at government funds. That means less funds allocated for desks, chairs, books, and fans in classrooms across the island. But to my opponents, if we put a cap on public sector wages as a percentage of GDP, we encourage better decisions. It's about spending better, not spending more. And when we spend better, we are more likely to develop, growing our earnings. When the GDP grows, the allocation for wages increases. Mr. Speaker, let me give you a simple analogy. Mary and her family have a fixed income. Eating out, now and then it's fine if you can afford it. But they decide to frequent the most expensive restaurants.
All right, thank you. That is time.
All right, thank you.
Okay. All right. So we will now engage in the second period of cross-questioning. Rashan.
All right, thank you very much. I think I'm going to throw my previous question to the entire bench. The question about how it is that we account for inflation with the model you're proposing for capping salaries.
Thank you for that question. So the model we propose would actually help to manage inflation, one, as the first speaker would have explained, by telling Jamaica is a safe place to do business, generating jobs, increasing tax revenue, and boosting productivity. Also, if we arbitrarily increase wages, it's another push for inflation. So actually managing the wages and keeping them at a balanced figure would help to keep the inflation down because we have less money chasing the goods. If we raise the wages, we have more money chasing fewer goods, and that is how inflation becomes a problem. So if inflation is rising, it's probably not to do with the wages, and something else in the economy needs to be addressed.
All right. My follow-up question regarding the cap. One, again, I'll note that whilst it asks for a fixed percentage and we didn't get a fixed percentage, when you know that the government will determine what is important, and I'm not sure how the government will determine what is important to me, but at the same time, we know that when there is more monies in the pockets of our citizens, then they are better able to spend more and we keep the wheels of the economy turning. We have seen over the past decade or more that growth has been very, very slow. You might call it steady, but very slow compared to other countries. How then do we say to individuals, buy into this model despite the challenges that we see with the limited growth that we're experiencing as a country?
That's a fair question. This model is supposed to be the type that, yes, it implements restraint, but for long-term sustainability. So we have seen before where because of this model, we're able to cut away at our debt, and we've seen examples of this also in Ireland. We even have a reverse example, for example, in South Africa, where the wage bill is above 13% and would contribute to the financial crisis. What I would say why they would need to buy into this is because we cannot just account for one sector of the public. The government has the responsibility to maintain economic stability for the benefit of all Jamaicans, and that's what this cap would help us do.
All right. So throughout your presentations, you've touched on the topic of brain drain, right? So my question to you is, how should the government incentivize our brightest and best minds to serve the country if we restrict the amounts that they can earn in the ways that you propose?
Mr. Speaker, or sir, the solution to brain drain is not to irresponsibly raise wages. It is to wisely manage public finances, invest in infrastructure, education, and job creation so that staying in Jamaica becomes a viable and attractive option to our best and brightest. We could also retrain people to serve the sectors, including in the private sector, that we need most, such as the booming technological sphere. Thank you.
Inflation aside, how do we reconcile the external market elements and the impacts that they would have on the GDP if we utilize a cap on wages? So how do we reconcile volatile market elements and the impact that they have on GDP relative to implementing the cap on wages? All right, so the question is, how do we reconcile the external market elements and the impacts that they might have on the GDP relative to us implementing a cap on wages?
Right, and we're definitely not saying that public sector wages are directly influencing the GDP, and we understand that the GDP is influenced by other factors, and that's why, as I stated before, we definitely want this to be implemented not solely arbitrarily, but a part of a broader plan. So we would be accounting for those external shocks that could temporarily cause the GDP to go down by ensuring that we have a reserve and a buffer, especially for our essential workers. In the long term, this would contribute to an upward trend in the GDP, which would mean more allocation for wages.
Question. We know it exists in public sector. Not everybody earns the same. Salary scales are different, and in placing a cap, we don't know what percentage as yet, but you would be consulting, as the first speaker stated, with trade unions and other stakeholders. Now, when you have a disproportionate salaries existing in the public sector, how do you account for those who are at the lower salary scales? Placing a cap, let's say, impact them earning less compared to those who have received like 200% salary increases and stuff like that.
Thank you for that question. I would actually say that the lack of a cap is what allowed for a 200-300% salary increase to happen, because if we had a figure that we could not pass, they would be forced to manage the resources more responsibly. We also wish to reiterate that a cap is a limit and there is room for flexibility below it. So how you allocate the amount of money that you have given that cap is, I would say, a different question, like outside of the realms of the Moot, but we believe that this can be done in our framework, within our framework.
All right, so we're going to pause the debate for a minute at this point to allow the reply speaker to put the finishing touches on her speech, and then we'll take her after 1 minute. Yes, and with that, we now invite the reply speaker from side proposition to close out this debate.
Thank you. Are you sure that was a minute? All right. Mr. Speaker, we must reiterate that public wages should be capped as a fixed percentage of GDP. I strongly emphasize that the position we defend today is not one of an absolute cap, but a relative cap as a percentage of GDP. This policy represents a fiscally responsible approach to managing public debt while advancing our growth and development goals. Mr. Speaker, this measure would not be undertaken arbitrarily, but in consultation with the necessary stakeholders, prioritizing the fair compensation of public sector workers while managing our resources more sustainably. Let's recap. My teammates have aptly explained that 1, capping the public sector wage bill as a percentage of GDP would help to manage debt. We must ensure that the wage bill is manageable so that we don't have to borrow more to pay it or to fund other critical economic activities. Once again, though hang your hat where your hand can't reach it. Rising public sector wages can be inflationary by prompting investors to lose confidence in our ability to repay it, or simply by having more money chasing fewer goods. Our proposal would help to manage inflation, telling investors that Jamaica is a safe place to do business, thus generating jobs, increasing tax revenues, and boosting productivity. 3, we've outlined how inflation management ensures that Jamaicans can benefit from increased price stability, meaning they can budget more effectively and feel more confident about saving and investing. And 4, the fiscal flexibility provided when a wage bill is capped to a percentage of GDP ensures effective allocation of resources to the various sectors which serve the public. This means improved infrastructure, better quality healthcare, and enhanced education for the children of Jamaica. So, Mr. Speaker, collectively, we have demonstrated that this is a fiscally responsible approach apt for application, particularly in the medium term, so that Jamaicans may benefit from a growing GDP in the long run. We repeat that a relative cap on the wage bill does not mean that public sector wages will automatically decrease. It means that when GDP grows, wages can grow, and when GDP shrinks, salaries can remain the same. Remember, a cap is a limit, and so there is lots of room for flexibility below it. Our opponents might, well, we don't have opponents today, but you might be persuaded to believe that a performance-based approach is better. However, this is one that we should approach with extreme caution, because the IMF has conducted various studies in which they find that the countries that have implemented this strategy did not benefit from it as much as they thought they would have. I also wish to emphasize that a performance-based strategy is less transparent than salary, pay bands, and scales, which see employees moving across the bands with tenure and up the bands with promotions. These are performance-based. So if you're at the lower salary band, you can perform better and move up the band, right? Mr. Speaker, you may also be convinced that capping public sector wages might worsen brain drain, but this is not the case. As I've previously explained, Jamaicans are often disappointed when they go to more developed countries and find that the cost of living there is twice as high, and so the pay that they're receiving is still stretching to meet their needs. Mr. Speaker, capping public sector wages as a percentage of GDP is a good strategy to pursue. Jamaica can benefit from this, as we would not be irresponsibly raising wages anymore, but we'd be wisely managing our finances so that Jamaica is a good place to do business, raise your children, and have fun, right? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, team Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Give them another round of applause. They so eloquently presented their arguments for the moot. Be it resolved that public sector wages should be capped as a fixed percentage of GDP. We want to say thank you for presenting your arguments despite the fact that you had no opponents. Now, if we want to continue the conversation, are you for or against the moot? Let us know in our comments. And we'll now take a short break while our judges deliberate. The next person you will hear is from our chair adjudicator, who will let us know who won the match. Stay tuned.
All right, so good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Javon Downey, and I was the chair adjudicator for this match, though one-sided. We want to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade for very interesting presentation. We appreciated your approach to the motion. However, we just like to caution you that in motions of this nature, you don't want to be seen as shying away from setting the context, because based on the motion, it required you to definitively give us a fixed percentage at which the GDP should be capped, at which the GDP should be capped, and you kind of shied away from that, right, for public sector wages. But notwithstanding that, to add to that, we also want you to explain clearly from the get-go when you're setting up your context or when you're framing the debate what the parameters are. So you don't want to leave it up to interpretation or leave it up to question, because if you had maybe an opponent, they would have challenged you on certain aspects of how you frame the debate, right? So we want you to give us everything from the get-go. Don't leave it up to further examination, right? Mechanize your point or your policy fully from the inception. So the first speaker, you come and you want to lay that context and set out the mechanism, right? Don't leave it to further probing. That is when you're actually bringing it out, because some of the things that would have been subsumed under your policies, we only got them through the cross-examination. You don't want that to be the case. We want you to give it to us from the get-go, right, and just build on it through your subsequent speeches. Also, remember to put yourself in your opponent's shoes and anticipate questions that they would ask, so as to be better prepared and, not caught off guard by certain questions, as in the case of the second speaker, right? You want to ensure that you are well read and you know everything. Well, not everything, but have a good appreciation of what they will come with and prepare for that in the event that they do come with it. Like we spoke about it in training. They say, okay, I know that my opponents will come and they will say this, but we've already anticipated it, and to that we are going to tell you this. Right? And finally, don't operate in silos. So be familiar with all the points of your teammates, right? Again, so because we're not preparing our speeches in silo, we're working as a team. So even though I am focusing on two specific points, if I'm asked a question that is going to be covered by a speaker that will come later, I should at least have a basic idea to say, okay, give a basic response, and then say my third speaker or my second speaker will expound in greater details on that as when they come to give their substantive presentation. Again, you guys did very well. We thought you pivoted well and answered to our questions in a very adequate manner. And to that we say kudos. It's not easy to go up against adjudicators, and you guys stood your grounds, right? So we thought that was very insightful of you, and you guys did well. So you would have scored 277 for this match based on our deliberation, and that is a fairly good score. Right, so now I'll hand over to the best speaker. So we would have given the best speaker to the first speaker, that is Miss Cunningham. Right, yes. So thank you. I now hand over to Miss Gunmighty to continue.
Thank you so much to our adjudicators. And thank you so much to our team, our winning team, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. Let's give them another round of applause. And thank you so very much for our viewers joining us online and for our viewers here as well. You may stay tuned for our upcoming match at 2 p.m. It's the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation going up against the National Environment and Planning Agency, and they'll be debating the moot. Be it resolved that despite competitive pressures posed to PPV operators, JUTC subsidies provide a net benefit to society. Come back to us at 2 p.m. for that matchup. Thank you so much.